Hey, what's going on guys? Arekkz here, welcome back to another video for Valorant, and today I want to put together a beginner's guide for those of you jumping into Valorant for the first time. Maybe you've got your key, you're jumping in to try it out, and depending on what other shooters you've played in your gaming history, this game will either feel very at home to you or will feel very, very different. If you have history with CSGO, then you'll feel right at home. Meanwhile, if you come from games like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Rainbow Six, things like that, then Valorant will definitely have a learning curve to it. There'll definitely be things you need to adjust to, but once you start to get a feel for it, once you start to understand how the game plays, it is incredibly enjoyable. So in this video, I want to go over a few things: positioning, tactics, movement, all that kind of stuff that'll help you get the best start possible in game.
Put down, target down.
So let's start at the top and talk about shooting. Ultimately, this is what you'll spend the majority of your time doing in this game, and hopefully you'll spend more time shooting people than getting shot. But either way, understanding the mechanics of the game is incredibly important. One of the first things you want to get into the habit of doing is learning to aim high. Headshots in this game are deadly, and learning to aim at head level for most of your engagements will oftentimes allow you to instant kill your opponents depending on the weapon that you have. Now, yes, this will take some adjusting to, but generally speaking, if you can get into the habit of understanding that aim height and positioning your shots in such a way, then means that whenever you do come into engagements, generally speaking, your crosshair will be on the right place, and if it is a one-on-one fight, you should come out on top. Of course, this also goes hand in hand with pre-aiming, learning where to aim before even peeking a corner. When you start to play the game more, when you start to learn the maps, when you start to learn where people will be, or if say your team has got like a Sova player and you've got the necessary intel, being able to pre-aim the corners when you're moving around. This is a tactic that is of course not exclusive to Valorant. This is of course a general FPS tactic, but learning to pre-aim corners at the right height when you move around, again, it's going to help you massively when it comes to winning those engagements. It's also important in a game like this to slow down your playstyle, and what I mean by that is obviously, when you're in an engagement, you need to think fast, yes, but when it comes to actually moving, you don't want to be sprinting around the map. This is not Call of Duty. You don't want to dash around the corner and expect to just be able to drop someone in an instant. You want to factor in that when you're moving in Valorant, when you are at running speed, there is no sprint, but when you're at running speed, your aim is not accurate. If you stand in front of someone, you run towards someone, and you spray from the hip, chances are none of those bullets are going to hit. So you want to learn and get into the habit of shift walking or crouch walking, because doing so will actually result in much greater accuracy. Obviously, if you want the most accurate shots, you want to stand still, but crouch walking, shift walking will be considerably more accurate than if you were sprinting, and thus if you are kind of running around a corner or moving around a corner, should I say, and you happen to see someone, then chances are you may be able to win that engagement, versus if you were sprinting, chances are you won't. Additionally, it's also worth considering that if you aim down sights, you do have a slightly reduced rate of fire on your gun, so learning to shoot and basically fire from the hip without ADS will ultimately result in faster kill time. Sure, sometimes you may want to aim down sights, it may be more natural to you, but the sooner you can get into the habit of hip firing, the better off you'll be. Additionally, it's also worth noting that weapons have spray patterns. Each weapon does have a learnable spray pattern with minor RNG spread towards the end of it. So if you get into the habit of kind of, holding down fire, then understanding these spray patterns is integral to mastering that weapon. Alternatively, if you're coming in and you're newer, you are much better off just basically burst firing your weapon, firing out single shots, because that will of course maximize your accuracy and then should give you some better results in your early engagements.
Get out of here.
Next up, let's talk about movement. Again, I spoke about the fact that shift walking is important, but from a movement point of view, it's also important because footsteps in this game are huge. In some games, you may not necessarily pay attention to footsteps. There may be a lot of things you can kind of rely on, like radars and whatnot, but generally speaking, in a game like this, footsteps are huge. You can hear them very noticeably whenever you're moving around the map, and similarly, if you are running yourself, the other team can also hear you. Shift walking or crouch walking will remove your footsteps completely, meaning you can move around the map stealthily. Yes, of course it's slower, but there's nothing worse than running around a corner with the enemy knowing that you're coming that way, and then they basically shoot you in the head because you've given away your position. So crouch walk, shift walk around corners and remove your footsteps. Additionally, crouching in itself is a very useful tactic. Generally speaking, it's good to use whilst trying to disengage from encounters, from combat and whatnot. As mentioned previously, you can shoot whilst crouching for decent accuracy. So if you're trying to sort of, get out of a fight or position yourself or get behind cover, then crouching in fire is a good way to go about doing this. Additionally, B-hopping is something you will probably want to try and get a handle on. This is essentially a movement trick you can learn to move slightly faster. It doesn't seem to give you the same movement speed increase that it would in something like CSGO, but it is incredibly important in a game like Valorant because if you take someone like Sage, who throws her ice on the ground and can heavily slow your movement, learning to B-hop or bunny hop will actually allow you to move across that ice considerably quicker, which will then hopefully stop you from being shot in the process. Moving on from there to talk about attacking. Games in Valorant work around two main phases, attacking phases and defending phases. Now there are lots of different strategies you can use as a team when it comes to attacking, but for the sake of the beginner's guide, just to kind of give you guys the basics, top level, when you're on the attacking side, one person on your team will carry a bomb or a spike, as it's known in Valorant, and this then needs to be placed on the point. You then need to defend it until the spike explodes. That's generally speaking top level for attack. Now, of course, it's very important to communicate with your team where you can. Yes, again, as mentioned, sometimes communication, if you join random lobbies, isn't always that great. So in times like that, what you really want to do is pay attention to where your team are moving. Pull up the map, look at where the majority of your team are going, not necessarily saying you always need to stick together in one big group. Sometimes you may want to divide yourself, say send 3 people to one point, 2 to another, but generally speaking, whoever is carrying the spike is going to need some kind of backup. So in order to play effectively, you want to work with them, move with them, and try and effectively escort them to the point, and then lock it down together as a team. Meanwhile, when it comes to defending, much like attacking, there are again a variety of different strategies you can use, but for the purposes of this guide, top level, as a defender, you need to stop people from planting the spike, and in the event they do plant the spike, you then need to defuse it before it goes off. Now defending, of course, involves holding both points simultaneously. You'll of course have to do this with different configurations. Some maps have 3 points, A, B, and C, meanwhile others just have 2. The main things you need to focus on as defenders are ensuring that all points are covered. Yes, that does mean that sometimes you'll have to hold a point on your own, but generally speaking, you don't want to leave one point uncovered because then it gives the attackers the opportunity to sneak in, plant the spike, and get an easy win. So again, even in the event you are not able to communicate with your team, or you just choose not to go on comms, pulling up the map, working out where your team have gone and looking for gaps, maybe 2 people have gone A, B is exposed and C is covered, it's then your job to try and fill in those gaps. Of course, when it comes to defending, you also need to make sure you're positioning yourself correctly, make sure you're covering those sight lines. If you're playing as characters like Cypher or other characters that have the ability to block off different walkways, ensure that you have corridors covered with abilities, corridors covered by your sight, and then ensure that no matter what happens, you're able to move around the point and try and defend as best as possible. Note that whenever someone is planting the spike, there is a very noticeable audio cue, so listen out for that, because if somebody is planting the spike near you, then it's your job to call out to your team, let them know you need backup, so then everybody can rotate to move accordingly. Because of course, once you know where the enemy are, once you know where they're trying to plant the spike, there's no need to necessarily defend the other points. Another thing that's important in Valorant is the economy. Whenever it comes to the beginning of a round, you of course have the option to buy your weapon, buy your abilities that you want for that given round, and of course as you play, as you get kills, as you complete rounds, you will then get more currency. You can also see what the minimum amount of currency you'll get per round is on the buy-in screen. So if you are wondering what will happen, even if you play really badly, you can use this to plan for rounds ahead. And this is incredibly important because it's very tempting sometimes to just jump in and be like, I'm going to buy whatever I can. But you often need to think multiple rounds ahead. Round 1, typically all you're going to be buying is a pistol, maybe some armor. However, learning what an eco round is, or an economy round, is very important for working with your team. Sometimes you may be on the back foot, sometimes you may be getting defeated, sometimes you may be in a round where you get completely swamped. It may well then be a team tactic to have an eco round where you don't spend much money, and you then go in with less than optimal weapons, so that then on the following round you'll have the money, you'll have the necessary currency you need to buy the more powerful weapons, the weapons that you can ultimately use to make that push, and you can then bring it back. So don't always think about spending all your money, sometimes think about saving it to work with your team. Additionally, look out for your teammates as well. Sometimes if you have been playing exceptionally well and your teammates maybe have been falling behind, you can often buy weapons for them. If you are low on currency, you can request that someone buys it, and assuming they have enough, assuming they're generous and they're there to help you, which they should be, they're on your team, then they too can buy weapons for you. And then finally, to round it all out, the last thing is on positioning. Ultimately, this is important in pretty much any shooter, But when you're defending, you need to not be predictable in the way that you defend, and also the same thing goes for when you're peeking around corners. Work with the position and use it, sure, but then find other angles in that same area that you can use to look at that same position. You don't then want to be predictable to the point where every single time a round starts, you run to that very same corner, because the second the enemy team starts to get wind of that, you're very quickly going to get picked off each round. So look at the area, look at the map, look at where you're defending, look at the points you need to focus on, the sight lines or things like that, and try and get a feel for different places you can position yourself in the event the enemy is coming from different angles. But ultimately, that is pretty much it. That's a quick rundown on some things you want to factor in when you're starting in Valorant. It may seem a little bit daunting once you first start if you haven't played a game like this before, but once you really start to get a feel for it, once you start to get better at it, it is genuinely a lot of fun to play. Anyway, that's it for the time being. Hopefully you guys find this helpful. If you have any more questions, by all means let us know in the comments down below, and be sure to keep it locked for plenty more. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. Don't forget, if you haven't already done so, you can join the Arekkz Gaming Discord. We've got an awesome community over there with so many different channels for you to chat loads of different topics and different games. I'm in there, the team's in there if you guys want to chat with us, find people to play with. It's just in general a great place to be. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of our future uploads.